All-electric JB Straubel has a 2-inch long scar that cuts across the middle of his left cheek. He earned it in high school, during a chemistry class experiment. Straubel whipped up the wrong concoction of chemicals, and the beaker he was holding exploded, throwing off shards of glass, one of which sliced through his face. The wound lingers as a tinkerer's badge of honor. It arrived near the end of a childhood full of experimentation with chemicals and machines. Born in Wisconsin, Straubel constructed a large chemistry lab in the basement of his family's home that included fume hoods and chemicals ordered, borrowed, or pilfered. At 13, Straubel found an old golf cart at the dump. He brought it back home and restored it to working condition, which required him to rebuild the electric motor. It seemed that Straubel was always taking something apart, sprucing it up, and putting it back together. All of this fit into the Straubel family's do-it-yourself traditions. In the late 1890s, Straubel's great-grandfather started the Straubel Machine Company, which built one of the first internal combustion engines in the United States and used it to power boats. Straubel's inquisitive spirit carried him west to Stanford University, where he enrolled in 1994 intending to become a physicist. After flying through the hardest courses he could take, Straubel concluded that majoring in physics would not be for him. The advanced courses were too theoretical, and Straubel liked to get his hands dirty. He developed his own major called Energy Systems and Engineering. "I wanted to take software and electricity and use it to control energy," Straubel said. "It was computing combined with power electronics. I collected all the things I love doing in one place." There was no clean technology movement at this time, but there were companies dabbling with new uses for solar power and electric vehicles. Straubel ended up hunting down these startups, hanging out in their garages and pestering the engineers. He began tinkering once again on his own as well in the garage of a house he shared with a half-dozen friends. Straubel bought a piece of shit Porsche for $1,600 and turned it into an electric car. This meant that Straubel had to create a controller to manage the electric motor, build a charger from scratch, and write the software that made the entire machine work. The car set the world record for electric vehicle, EV, acceleration, traveling a quarter mile in 17.28 seconds. "The thing I took away was that the electronics were great, and you could get acceleration on a shoestring budget, but the batteries sucked," Straubel said. "It had a 30-mile range, so I learned firsthand about some of the limitations of electric vehicles." Straubel gave his car a hybrid boost, building a gasoline-powered contraption that could be towed behind the Porsche and used to recharge the batteries. It was good enough for Straubel to drive the 400 miles down to Los Angeles and back. By 2002, Straubel was living in Los Angeles. He'd gotten a master's degree from Stanford and bounced around a couple of companies looking for something that called out to him. He decided on Rosen Motors, which had built one of the world's first hybrid vehicles, a car that ran off a flywheel and a gas turbine and had electric motors to drive the wheel. After it folded, Straubel followed Harold Rosen, an engineer famed for inventing the geostationary satellite, to create an electric plane. "I'm a pilot and love to fly, so this was perfect for me," Straubel said. The idea was that it would stay aloft for 2 weeks at a time and hover over a specific spot. This was way before drones and all that. To help make ends meet, Straubel also worked nights and on the weekend doing electronics consulting for a startup. It was in the midst of toiling away on all these projects that Straubel's old buddies from the Stanford solar car team came to pay him a visit. A group of rogue engineers at Stanford had been working on solar cars for years, building them in a World War II-era Quonset hut full of toxic chemicals and black widows. Unlike today, when the university would jump at the chance to support such a project, Stanford tried to shut down this group of fringe freaks and geeks. The students proved very capable of doing the work on their own and competed in cross-country solar-powered car races. Straubel helped build the vehicles during his time at university and even after, forming relationships with the incoming crop of engineers. The team had just raced 2,300 miles from Chicago to Los Angeles, and Straubel offered the strapped, exhausted kids a place to stay. About a half dozen students showed up at Straubel's place, took their first showers in many days, and then spread across his floor. As they chatted late into the night, Straubel and the solar team kept fixating on one topic. They realized that lithium-ion batteries such as the ones in their car being fed by the sun had gotten much better than most people realized. Many consumer electronics devices like laptops were running on so-called 18,650 lithium-ion batteries, which looked a lot like AA batteries and could be strung together. We wondered what would happen if you put 10,000 of the battery cells together, Straubel said. We did the math and figured you could go almost 1,000 miles. It was totally nerdy shit, and eventually everyone fell asleep, but the idea really stuck with me. Soon enough, Straubel was stalking the solar car crew, trying to talk them into building an electric car based on the lithium-ion batteries. He would fly up to Palo Alto, spend the night sleeping in his plane, and then ride a bicycle to the Stanford campus to make his sales pitch while helping with their current projects. The design Straubel had come up with was a super aerodynamic vehicle with 80% of its mass made up of the batteries. It looked quite a bit like a torpedo on wheels. No one knew the exact details of Straubel's long-term vision for this thing, including Straubel. The plan seemed to be less about forming a car company than about building a proof-of-concept vehicle just to get people thinking about the power of the lithium-ion batteries. With any luck, they would find a race to compete in. The Stanford students agreed to join Straubel, if he could raise some money. He began going to trade shows handing out brochures about his idea and emailing just about anyone he could think of. I was shameless, he said. The only problem was that no one had any interest in what Straubel was selling. Investors dealt him one rejection after another for months on end. Then, in the fall of 2003, Straubel met Elon Musk. Harold Rosen had set up a lunch with Musk at a seafood restaurant near the SpaceX headquarters in Los Angeles and brought Straubel along to help talk up the electric plane idea. When Musk didn't bite on that, Straubel announced his electric car side project. The crazy idea struck an immediate chord with Musk, who had been thinking about electric vehicles for years. While Musk had mostly focused on using ultracapacitors for the vehicles, he was thrilled and surprised to hear how far the lithium-ion battery technology had progressed. Everyone else had told me I was nuts, but Elon loved the idea, Straubel said. He said, "Sure, I will give you some money." Musk promised Straubel $10,000 of the $100,000 he was seeking. On the spot, Musk and Straubel formed a kinship that would survive more than a decade of extreme highs and lows as they set out to do nothing less than change the world. After the meeting with Musk, Straubel reached out to his friends at AC Propulsion. The Los Angeles-based company started in 1992 and was the bleeding edge of electric vehicles, building everything from zippy mid-size passenger jobs right on up to sports cars. Straubel really wanted to show Musk the T0, from T0, the highest-end vehicle in AC Propulsion's stable. It was a type of kit car that had a fiberglass body sitting on top of a steel frame and went from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 4.9 seconds when first unveiled in 1997. Straubel had spent years hanging out with the AC Propulsion crew and asked Tom Gage, the company's president, to bring a T0 over for Musk to drive. Musk fell for the car. He saw its potential as a screaming fast machine that could shift the perception of electric cars from boring and plodding to something aspirational. For months Musk offered to fund an effort to transform the kit car into a commercial vehicle but got rebuffed time and again. It was a proof of concept and needed to be made real, Straubel said. I love the hell out of the AC Propulsion guys, but they were sort of hopeless at business and refused to do it. They kept trying to sell Elon on this car called the E-Box that looked like shit, didn't have good performance, and was just uninspiring. While the meetings with AC Propulsion didn't result in a deal, they had solidified Musk's interest in backing something well beyond Straubel's science project. In a late February 2004 email to Gage, Musk wrote, What I'm going to do is figure out the best choice of a high-performance space car and electric powertrain and go in that direction. Unbeknownst to Strobel, at about the same time, a couple of business partners in Northern California had also fallen in love with the idea of making a lithium-ion battery-powered car. Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning had founded Nuvo Media in 1997 to create one of the earliest electronic book readers, called the Rocket eBook. The work at Nuvo Media had given the men insight into cutting-edge consumer electronics and the hugely improved lithium-ion batteries used to power laptops and other portable devices. While the Rocket eBook was too far ahead of its time and not a major commercial success, it was innovative enough to attract the attention of Gemstar International Group, which owned TV Guide and some electronic programming guide technology. Gemstar paid $187 million to acquire Nuvo Media in March 2000. Spoils in hand, the co-founders stayed in touch after the deal. They both lived in Woodside, one of the wealthiest towns in Silicon Valley, and chatted from time to time about what they should tackle next. "We thought up some goofball things," said Tarpenning. "There was one plan for these fancy irrigation systems for farms and the home based on smart water sensing networks. But nothing really resonated, and we wanted something more important." Eberhard was a supremely talented engineer with a do-gooder's social conscience. The United States' repeated conflicts in the Middle East bothered him, and like many other science-minded folks around 2000 he had started to accept global warming as a reality. Eberhard began looking for alternatives to gas-guzzling cars. He investigated the potential of hydrogen fuel cells but found them lacking. He also didn't see much point in leasing something like the EV1 electric car from General Motors. What did catch Eberhard's interest, however, were the all-electric cars from AC Propulsion that he spied on the internet. Eberhard went down to Los Angeles around 2001 to visit the AC Propulsion shop. The place looked like a ghost town and like they were going out of business, Eberhard said. "I bailed them out with $500,000 so that they could build one of their cars for me with lithium-ion instead of lead-acid batteries." Eberhard too tried to goad AC Propulsion into being a commercial enterprise rather than a hobby shop. When they rejected his overtures, Eberhard decided to form his own company and see what the lithium-ion batteries could really do. Eberhard's journey began with him building a technical model of the electric car on a spreadsheet. This let him tweak various components and see how they might affect the vehicle's shape and performance. He could adjust the weight, number of batteries, resistance of the tires and body, and then get back answers on how many batteries it would take to power the various designs. The models made it clear that SUVs, which were very popular at the time, and things like delivery trucks were unlikely candidates. The technology seemed instead to favor a lighter weight, high-end sports car, which would be fast, fun to drive, and have far better range than most people would expect. These technical specifications complemented the findings of Tarpenning, who had been doing research into a financial model for the car. The Toyota Prius had started to take off in California, and it was being purchased by wealthy eco-crusaders. We also learned that the average income for EV1 owners was around $200,000 per year, Tarpenning said. People who used to go after the Lexus, BMW, and Cadillac brands saw electric and hybrid cars as a different kind of status symbol. The men figured they could build something for the $3 billion per year luxury auto market in the United States that would let rich people have fun and feel good about themselves too. "People pay for cool and sexy and an amazing 0 to 60 time," Tarpenning said. On July 1, 2003, Eberhard and Tarpenning incorporated their new company. While at Disneyland a few months earlier on a date with his wife, Eberhard had come up with the name Tesla Motors, both to pay homage to the inventor and electric motor pioneer Nikola Tesla and because it sounded cool. The co-founders rented an office that had 3 desks and 2 small rooms in a decrepit 1960s building located at 845 Oak Grove Avenue in Menlo Park. The third desk was occupied a few months later by Ian Wright, an engineer who grew up on a farm in New Zealand. He was a neighbor of the Tesla co-founders in Woodside, and had been working with them to hone his pitch for a networking startup. When the startup failed to raise any money from venture capitalists, Wright joined Tesla. As the three men began to tell some of their confidants of their plans, they were confronted with universal derision. "We met a friend at this Woodside pub to tell her what we had finally decided to do and that it was going to be an electric car," Tarp Enning said. "She said, 'You have to be kidding me.'" Anyone who tries to build a car company in the United States is quickly reminded that the last successful startup in the industry was Chrysler, founded in 1925. Designing and building a car from the ground up comes with plenty of challenges, but it's really getting the money and know-how to build lots of cars that has thwarted past efforts to get a new company going. The Tesla founders were aware of these realities. They figured that Nikola Tesla had built an electric motor a century earlier and that creating a drivetrain to take the power from the motor and send it to the wheels was doable. The really frightening part of their enterprise would be building the factory to make the car and its associated parts. But the more the Tesla guys researched the industry, the more they realized that the big automakers don't even really build their cars anymore. The days of Henry Ford having raw materials delivered to one end of his Michigan factory and then sending cars out the other end had long passed. BMW didn't make its windshields or upholstery or rear-view mirrors, Tarp Enning said. The only thing the big car companies had kept was internal combustion research, sales, and marketing, and the final assembly. "We thought naively that we could access all the same suppliers for our parts." The plan the Tesla co-founders came up with was to license some technology from AC propulsion around the T0 vehicle and to use the Lotus Elise chassis for the body of their car. Lotus, the English car maker, had released the two-door Elise in 1996, and it certainly had the sleek, ground-hugging appeal to make a statement to high-end car buyers. After talking to a number of people in the car dealership business, the Tesla team decided to avoid selling their cars through partners and sell direct. With these basics of a plan in place, the three men went hunting for some venture capital funding in January 2004. To make things feel more real for the investors, the Tesla founders borrowed a T0 from AC Propulsion and drove it to the venture capital corridor of Sand Hill Road. The car accelerated faster than a Ferrari, and this translated into visceral excitement for the investors. The downside, though, was that venture capitalists are not a terribly imaginative bunch, and they struggled to see past the crappy plastic finish of this glorified kit car. The only venture capitalists that bid were Compass Technology Partners and SDL Ventures, and they didn't sound altogether thrilled. The lead partner at Compass had made out well on Nouveau Media and felt some loyalty to Eberhard and Tarp Enning. He said, "This is stupid, but I have invested in every automotive startup for the last 40 years, so why not?" Tarp Enning recalled. Tesla still needed a lead investor who would pony up the bulk of the $7 million needed to make what's known as a mule or a prototype vehicle. That would be their first milestone and give them something physical to show off, which could aid a second round of funding. Eberhard and Tarp Enning had Elon Musk's name in the back of their heads as a possible lead investor from the outset. They had both seen him speak a couple of years earlier at a Mars Society conference held at Stanford where Musk had laid out his vision of sending mice into space, and they got the impression that he thought a bit differently and would be open to the idea of an electric car. The idea to pitch Musk on Tesla Motors solidified when Tom Gage from AC Propulsion called Eberhard and told him that Musk was looking to fund something in the electric car arena. Eberhard and Wright flew down to Los Angeles and met with Musk on a Friday. That weekend, Musk peppered Tarp Enning, who had been away on a trip, with questions about the financial model. "I just remember responding, Tarp Enning said. The following Monday, Martin and I flew down to meet him again, and he said, 'Okay, I'm in.'" The Tesla founders felt like they had lucked into the perfect investor. Musk had the engineering smarts to know what they were building. He also shared their larger goal of trying to end the United States' addiction to oil. "You need angel investors to have some belief, and it wasn't a purely financial transaction for him," Tarp Enning said. He wanted to change the energy equation of the country. With an investment of $6.5 million, Musk had become the largest shareholder of Tesla and the chairman of the company. Musk would later wield his position of strength well while battling Eberhard for control of Tesla. "It was a mistake," Eberhard said. "I wanted more investors. But, if I had to do it again, I would take his money. A bird in the hand, you know. We needed it." Not long after this meeting took place, Musk called Strobel and urged him to meet with the Tesla team. Strobel heard that their offices in Menlo Park were about a half a mile from his house, and he was intrigued but very skeptical of their story. No one on the planet was more dialed into the electric vehicle scene than Strobel, and he found it hard to believe that a couple of guys had gotten this far along without word of their project reaching him. Nonetheless, Strobel stopped by the office for a meeting, and was hired right away in May 2004 at a salary of $95,000 per year. "I told them that I had been building the battery pack they need down the street with funding from Elon," Strobel said. "We agreed to join forces and formed this ragtag group. Had anyone from Detroit stopped by Tesla Motors at this point, they would have ended up in hysterics." The sum total of the company's automotive expertise was that a couple of the guys at Tesla really liked cars and another one had created a series of science fair projects based on technology that the automotive industry considered ridiculous. What's more, the founding team had no intention of turning to Detroit for advice on how to build a car company. No, Tesla would do what every other Silicon Valley startup had done before it, which was hire a bunch of young, hungry engineers and figure things out as they went along. Never mind that the Bay Area had no real history of this model ever having worked for something like a car, and that building a complex, physical object had little in common with writing a software application. What Tesla did have, ahead of anyone else, was the realization that 18,650 lithium-ion batteries had gotten really good and were going to keep getting better. Hopefully that coupled with some effort and smarts would be enough. Strobel had a direct pipeline into the smart, energetic engineers at Stanford and told them about Tesla. Gene Berdichevsky, one of the members of the solar-powered car team, lit up the second he heard from Strobel. An undergraduate, Berdichevsky volunteered to quit school, work for free, and sweep the floors at Tesla if that's what it took to get a job. The founders were impressed with his spirit and hired Berdichevsky after one meeting. This left Berdichevsky in the uncomfortable position of calling his Russian immigrant parents, a pair of nuclear submarine engineers, to tell them that he was giving up on Stanford to join an electric car startup. As employee number 7, he spent part of the workday in the Menlo Park office and the rest in Strobel's living room designing three-dimensional models of the car's powertrain on a computer and building battery pack prototypes in the garage. "Only now do I realize how insane it was," Berdichevsky said. Tesla soon needed to expand to accommodate its budding engineer army and to create a workshop that would help bring the Roadster, as they were now calling the car, to life. They found a 2-story industrial building in San Carlos at 1050 Commercial Street. The 10,000 square foot facility wasn't much, but it had room to build a research and development shop capable of knocking out some prototype cars. There were a couple of large assembly bays on the right side of the building and 2 large roll-up doors big enough for cars to drive in and out. Wright divided the open floor space into segments: motors, batteries, power electronics, and final assembly. The left half of the building was an office space that had been modified in weird ways by the previous tenant, a plumbing supply company. The main conference room had a wet bar and a sink where the faucet was a swan's mouth, and the hot and cold knobs were wings. Berdichevsky painted the office white on a Sunday night, and the next week the employees made a field trip to IKEA to buy desks and hopped online to order their computers from Dell. As for tools, Tesla had a single Craftsman toolbox loaded with hammers, nails, and other carpentry basics. Musk would visit now and again from Los Angeles and was unfazed by the conditions, having seen SpaceX grow up in similar surroundings. The original plan for producing a prototype vehicle sounded simple. Tesla would take the AC propulsion Zero powertrain and fit it into the Lotus Elise body. The company had acquired a schematic for an electric motor design and figured it could buy a transmission from a company in the United States or Europe and outsource any other parts from Asia. Tesla's engineers mostly needed to focus on developing the battery pack systems, wiring the car, and cutting and welding metal as needed to bring everything together. Engineers love to muck around with hardware, and the Tesla team thought of the Roadster as something akin to a car conversion project that could be done with 2 or 3 mechanical engineers, and a few assembly people. The main team of prototype builders consisted of Straubel, Berdichevsky, and David Lyons, a very clever mechanical engineer and employee number 12. Lyons had about a decade of experience working for Silicon Valley companies and had met Straubel a few years before when the two men struck up a conversation at a 7-Eleven about an electric bike Straubel was riding. Lyons had helped Straubel pay bills by hiring him as a consultant for a company building a device to measure people's core body temperature. Straubel thought he could return the favor by bringing Lyons on early to such an exciting project. Tesla would benefit in a big way as well. As Berdichevsky put it, Dave Lyons knew how to get shit done. The engineers bought a blue lift for the car and set it up inside the building. They also purchased some machine tools, hand tools, and floodlights to work at night and started to turn the facility into a hotbed of R&D activity. Electrical engineers studied the Lotus's base-level software to figure out how it tied together the pedals, mechanical apparatus, and the dashboard gauges. The really advanced work took place with the battery pack design. No one had ever tried to combine hundreds of lithium-ion batteries in parallel, so Tesla ended up at the cutting edge of the technology. The engineers started trying to understand how heat would dissipate and current flow would behave across 70 batteries by supergluing them together into groups called bricks. Then 10 bricks would be placed together, and the engineers would test various types of air and liquid cooling mechanisms. When the Tesla team had developed a workable battery pack, they stretched the yellow Lotus Elise chassis 5 inches and lowered the pack with a crane into the back of the car, where its engine would normally be. These efforts began in earnest on October 18, 2004, and, rather remarkably, 4 months later, on January 27, 2005, an entirely new kind of car had been built by 18 people. It could even be driven around. Tesla had a board meeting that day, and Musk zipped about in the car. He came away happy enough to keep investing. Musk put in $9 million more as Tesla raised a $13 million funding round. The company now planned to deliver the Roadster to consumers in early 2006. Once they'd finished building a second car a few months later, the engineers at Tesla decided they needed to face up to a massive potential flaw in their electric vehicle. On July 4, 2005, they were at Eberhard's house in Woodside celebrating Independence Day and figured it was as good a moment as any to see what happened when the Roadster's batteries caught on fire. Someone taped 20 of the batteries together, put a heating strip wire into the bundle, and set it off. It went up like a cluster of bottle rockets, Lyons said. Instead of 20 batteries, the Roadster would have close to 7,000, and the thought of what an explosion at that scale would be like horrified the engineers. One of the perks of an electric car was meant to be that it moved people away from a flammable liquid like gasoline and the endless explosions that take place in an engine. Rich people were unlikely to pay a high price for something even more dangerous, and the early nightmare scenario for the employees at Tesla was that a rich, famous person would get caught in a fire caused by the car. It was one of those oh shit moments, Lyons said. That is when we really sobered up. Tesla formed a 6-person task force to deal with the battery issue. They were pulled off all other work and given money to begin running experiments. The first explosions started taking place at the Tesla headquarters, where the engineers filmed them in slow motion. Once saner minds prevailed, Tesla moved its explosion research to a blast area behind an electrical substation maintained by the fire department. Blast by blast, the engineers learned a great deal about the inner workings of the batteries. They developed methods for arranging them in ways that would prevent fires spreading from one battery to the next and other techniques for stopping explosions altogether. Thousands of batteries exploded along the way, and the effort was worth it. It was still early days, for sure, but Tesla was on the verge of inventing battery technology that would set it apart from rivals for years to come and would become one of the company's great advantages. The early success at building two prototype cars, coupled with Tesla's engineering breakthroughs around the batteries and other technological pieces, boosted the company's confidence. It was time to put Tesla's stamp on the vehicle. The original plan had been to do the bare minimum we could get away with as far as making the car stylistically different from a Lotus but electric, said Tarp Enning. Along the way, Elon and the rest of the board said, "You only get to do this once. It has to delight the customer, and the Lotus just isn't good enough to do that." The Elisa's chassis, or base frame, worked fine for Tesla's engineering purposes. But the body of the car had serious issues in both form and function. The door on the Elise was all of a foot tall, and you were meant to either jump into the car or fall into it, depending on your flexibility and/or dignity. The body also needed to be longer to accommodate Tesla's battery pack and a trunk. And Tesla preferred to make the Roadster out of carbon fiber instead of fiberglass. On these design points, Musk had a lot of opinion and influence. He wanted a car that Justine could feel comfortable getting into and that had some measure of practicality. Musk made these opinions clear when he visited Tesla for board meetings and design reviews. Tesla hired a handful of designers to mock up new looks for the Roadster. After settling on a favorite, the company paid to build a quarter-scale model of the vehicle in January 2005 and then a full-scale model in April. This process provided the Tesla executives with yet another revelation of everything that went into making a car. They wrap this shiny mylar material around the model and vacuum it, so that you can really see the contours and shine and shadows, Tarp Enning said. The silver model was then turned into a digital rendering that the engineers could manipulate on their computers. A British company took the digital file and used it to create a plastic version of the car called an Aerobuck for aerodynamics testing. They put it on a boat and shipped it to us, and then we took it to Burning Man, Tarp Enning said, referring to the annual drug-infused art festival held in the Nevada desert. About a year later, after many tweaks and much work, Tesla had a pencils-down moment. It was May 2006, and the company had grown to 100 employees. This team built a black version of the Roadster known as EP1, or Engineering Prototype 1. It was saying, "We now think we know what we will build," Tarp Enning said. "You can feel it. It's a real car, and it's very exciting." The arrival of the EP1 provided a great excuse to show existing investors what their money had bought and to ask for more funds from a wider audience. The venture capitalists were impressed enough to overlook the fact that engineers sometimes had to manually fan the car to cool it down in between test drives and were now starting to grasp Tesla's long-term potential. Musk once again put money into Tesla, $12 million, and a handful of other investors, including the venture capital firm Draper Fisher Jurvetson, Vantage Point Capital Partners, J.P. Morgan, Compass Technology Partners, Nick Pritzker, Larry Page, and Sergey Brin, joined the $40 million round. In July 2006, Tesla decided to tell the world what it had been up to. The company's engineers had built a red prototype EP2 to complement the black one, and they both went on display at an event in Santa Clara. The press flocked to the announcement and were quite taken with what they saw. The Roadsters were gorgeous, two-seater convertibles that could go from 0 to 60 in about 4 seconds. Until today, Musk said at the event, all electric cars have sucked. 6 celebrities like then-Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and former Disney CEO Michael Eisner showed up at the event, and many of them took test rides in the Roadsters. The vehicles were so fragile that only Strobel and a couple of other trusted hands knew how to run them, and they were swapped out every 5 minutes to avoid overheating. Tesla revealed that each car would cost about $90,000 and had a range of 250 miles per charge. 30 people, the company said, had committed to buying a Roadster, including the Google co-founders Brin and Page and a handful of other technology billionaires. Musk promised that a cheaper car, a 4-seat, 4-door model under $50,000, would arrive in about 3 years. Around the time of this event, Tesla made its debut in the New York Times via a mini profile on the company. Eberhard vowed optimistically to begin shipments of the Roadster in the middle of 2007, instead of early 2006 as once planned, and laid out Tesla's strategy of starting with a high-priced, low-volume product and moving down to more affordable products over time, as underlying technology and manufacturing capabilities advanced. Musk and Eberhard were big believers in this strategy, having seen it play out with a number of electronic devices. Cell phones, refrigerators, color TVs. They didn't start off by making a low-end product for masses, Eberhard told the paper. 7. They were relatively expensive, for people who could afford it. While the story was a coup for Tesla, Musk didn't appreciate being left out of the article entirely. We tried to emphasize him, and told the reporter about him over and over again, but they weren't interested in the board of the company, Tarpenning said. Elon was furious. He was livid. You could understand why Musk might want some of the shine of Tesla to rub off on him. The car had turned into a cause célèbre of the automotive world. Electric vehicles tended to invoke religious overreactions from both the pro and con camps, and the appearance of a good-looking, fast electric car stoked everyone's passions. Tesla had also turned Silicon Valley into a real threat, at least conceptually, to Detroit for the first time. The month after the Santa Monica event was the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance, a famous showcase for exotic cars. Tesla had become such a topic of conversation that the organizers of the event begged to have a Roadster and waived the usual display fees. Tesla set up a booth, and people showed up by the dozens writing $100,000 checks on the spot to pre-order their cars. This was long before Kickstarter, and we just had not thought of trying to do that, Tarpenning said. But then we started getting millions of dollars at these types of events. Venture capitalists, celebrities, and friends of Tesla employees began trying to buy their way onto the waiting list. Some of Silicon Valley's wealthy elite went so far as to show up at the Tesla office and knock on the door, looking to buy a car. The entrepreneurs Konstantin Othmer and Bruce Leak, who had known Musk from his internship days at Rocket Science Games, did just that one weekday and ended up getting a personal tour of the car from Musk and Eberhard that stretched over a couple of hours. At the end we said, "We'll take one," Othmer said. They weren't actually allowed to sell cars yet, though, so we joined their club. It cost $100,000, but one of the benefits of membership was that you'd get a free car. As Tesla switched from marketing back into R&D mode, it had some trends working in its favor. Advances in computing had made it so that small car companies could sometimes punch at the same weight as the giants of the industry. Years ago, automakers would have needed to make a fleet of cars for crash testing. Tesla could not afford to do that, and it didn't have to. The third Roadster engineering prototype went to the same collision testing facility used by large automakers, giving Tesla access to top-off-the-line high-speed cameras and other imaging technology. Thousands of other tests, though, were done by a third party that specialized in computer simulations and saved Tesla from building a fleet of crash vehicles. Tesla also had equal access to the big guy's durability tracks made out of cobblestones and concrete embedded with metal objects. It could replicate 100,000 miles and 10 years of wear at these facilities. Quite often, the Tesla engineers brought their Silicon Valley attitude to the automaker's traditional stomping grounds. There's a brake and traction testing track in northern Sweden near the Arctic Circle where cars get tuned on large plains of ice. It would be standard to run the car for 3 days or so, get the data, and return to company headquarters for many weeks of meetings about how to adjust the car. The whole process of tuning a car can take the entire winter. Tesla, by contrast, sent its engineers along with the Roadsters being tested and had them analyze the data on the spot. When something needed to be tweaked, the engineers would rewrite some code and send the car back on the ice. BMW would need to have a confab between 3 or 4 companies that would all blame each other for the problem, Tarpenning said. We just fixed it ourselves. Another testing procedure required that the roadsters go into a special cooling chamber to check how they would respond to frigid temperatures. Not wanting to pay the exorbitant costs to use one of these chambers, the Tesla engineers opted to rent an ice cream delivery truck with a large refrigerated trailer. Someone would drive a roadster into the truck, and the engineers would don parkas and work on the car. Every time Tesla interacted with Detroit, it received a reminder of how the once great city had been separated from its own can-do culture. Tesla tried to lease a small office in Detroit. The costs were incredibly low compared with space in Silicon Valley, but the city's bureaucracy made getting just a basic office an ordeal. The building's owner wanted to see 7 years of audited financials from Tesla, which was still a private company. Then the building owner wanted 2 years' worth of advanced rent. Tesla had about $50 million in the bank and could have bought the building outright. In Silicon Valley, you say you're backed by a venture capitalist, and that's the end of the negotiation, Tarp Enning said. But everything was like that in Detroit. We'd get FedEx boxes, and they couldn't even decide who should sign for the package. Throughout these early years, the engineers credited Eberhard with making quick, crisp decisions. Rarely did Tesla get hung up over analyzing a situation. The company would pick a plan of attack, and when it failed at something, it failed fast and then tried a new approach. It was many of the changes that Musk wanted that started to delay the Roadster. Musk kept pushing for the car to be more comfortable, asking for alterations to the seats and the doors. He made the carbon fiber body a priority, and he pushed for electronic sensors on the doors so that the Roadster could be unlocked with the touch of a finger instead of a tug on a handle. Eberhard groused that these features were slowing the company down, and many of the engineers agreed. It felt at times like Elon was this unreasonably demanding overarching force, said Berdichevsky. The company as a whole was sympathetic to Martin because he was there all the time, and we all felt the car should ship sooner. By the middle of 2007, Tesla had grown to 260 employees and seemed to be pulling off the impossible. It had produced the fastest, most beautiful electric car the world had ever seen almost from thin air. All it had to do next was build a lot of the cars, a process that would end up almost bankrupting the company. The greatest mistake Tesla's executives made in the early days were assumptions around the transmission system for the Roadster. The goal had always been to get from 0 to 60 miles per hour as quickly as possible in the hopes that the raw speed of the Roadster would attract a lot of attention and make it fun to drive. To do this, Tesla's engineers had decided on a 2-speed transmission, which is the underlying mechanism in the car for transferring power from the motor to the wheels. The first gear would take the car from 0 to 60 miles per hour in less than 4 seconds, and then the second gear would take the car up to 130 miles per hour. Tesla had hired Strack, a British company specializing in transmission designs, to build this part and had every reason to believe that this would be one of the smoother bits of the Roadster's journey. People had been making transmissions since Robert Fulton built the steam engine, said Bill Curry, a veteran Silicon Valley engineer and employee number 86 at Tesla. We thought you would just order one. But the first one we had lasted 40 seconds. The initial transmission could not handle the big jump from the first to the second gear, and the fear was that the second gear would engage at high speed and not be synchronized with the motor properly, which would result in catastrophic damage to the car. Lyons and the other engineers quickly set out to try to fix the issue. They found a couple of other contractors to design replacements and again hoped that these longtime transmission experts would deliver something usable with relative ease. It soon became apparent, however, that the contractors were not always putting their team to work on this project for a tiny startup in Silicon Valley and that the new transmissions were no better than the first. During tests, Tesla found that the transmissions would sometimes break after 150 miles and that the mean time between failures was about 2,000 miles. When a team from Detroit ran a root cause analysis of the transmission to find failures, they discovered 14 separate issues that could cause the system to break. Tesla had wanted to deliver the Roadster in November 2007, but the transmission issues lingered, and by the time January 1, 2008, rolled around, the company had to once again start from scratch, on a third transmission push. Tesla also faced issues abroad. The company had decided to send a team of its youngest, most energetic engineers to Thailand to set up a battery factory. Tesla partnered with an enthusiastic although not totally capable manufacturing partner. The Tesla engineers had been told that they could fly over and manage the construction of a state-of-the-art battery factory. Instead of a factory, they found a concrete slab with posts holding up a roof. The building was about a 3-hour drive south from Bangkok, and had been left mostly open like many of the other factories because of the incredible heat. The other manufacturing operations dealt with making stoves, tires, and commodities that could withstand the elements. Tesla had sensitive batteries and electronics, and like parts of the Falcon 1, they'd be chewed up by the salty, humid conditions. Eventually, Tesla's partner paid about $75,000 to put in drywall, coat the floor, and create storage rooms with temperature controls. Tesla's engineers ended up working maddening hours trying to train the Thai workers on how to handle the electronics properly. The development of the battery technology, which had once moved along at a rapid pace, slowed to a crawl. The battery factory was one part of a supply chain that stretched across the globe, adding cost and delays to the Roadster production. Body panels for the car were to be made in France, while the motors were to come from Taiwan. Tesla planned on buying battery cells in China and shipping them to Thailand to turn the piece parts into battery packs. The battery packs, which had to be stored for a minimal amount of time to avoid degradation, would then be taken to port and shipped to England, where they needed to clear customs. Tesla then planned for Lotus to build the body of the car, attach the battery packs, and ship the Roadsters by boat around Cape Horn to Los Angeles. In that scenario, Tesla would have paid for the bulk of the car and had no chance to recognize revenue on the parts until 6 to 9 months had passed. The idea was to get to Asia, get things done fast and cheap, and make money on the car, said Forrest North, one of the engineers sent to Thailand. What we found out was that for really complicated things, you can do the work cheaper here and have less delays and less problems. When some new hires came on, they were horrified to discover just how haphazard Tesla's plan appeared. Ryan Popple, who had spent 4 years in the Army and then gotten an MBA from Harvard, arrived at Tesla as a director of finance meant to prep the company to go public. After examining the company's books early in his tenure, Popple asked the manufacturing and operations head exactly how he would get the car made. He said, "Well, we will decide we're going into production and then a miracle is going to happen," Popple said. As word of the manufacturing issues reached Musk, he became very concerned about the way Eberhard had run the company and called in a fixer to address the situation. One of Tesla's investors was Valor Equity, a Chicago-based investment firm that specialized in fine-tuning manufacturing operations. The company had been drawn to Tesla's battery and powertrain technology and calculated that even if Tesla failed to sell many cars, the big automakers would end up wanting to buy its intellectual property. To protect its investment, Valor sent in Tim Watkins, its managing director of operations, and he soon reached some horrific conclusions. Watkins is a Brit with degrees in industrial robotics and electrical engineering. He's built up a reputation as an ingenious solver of problems. While doing work in Switzerland, for example, Watkins found a way to get around the country's rigid labor laws that limit the hours employees can work, by automating a metal stamping factory so that it could run 24 hours per day instead of 16 hours like the factories or rivals. Watkins is also known for keeping his ponytail in place with a black scrunchie, wearing a black leather jacket, and toting a black fanny pack everywhere he goes. The fanny pack has his passport, checkbook, earplugs, sunscreen, food, and an assortment of other necessities. "It's full of the everyday things I need to survive," said Watkins. "If I walk 10 feet away from this thing, I sense it." While a bit eccentric, Watkins was thorough and spent weeks talking to employees and analyzing every part of Tesla's supply chain to figure out how much it cost to make the Roadster. Tesla had done a decent job of keeping its employee costs down. It hired the kid fresh out of Stanford for $45,000 rather than the proven guy who probably didn't want to work that hard anyway for $120,000. But when it came to equipment and materials, Tesla was a spending horror show. No one liked using the company's software that tracked the bill of materials. So some people used it, and some people didn't. Those that did use it often made huge errors. They would take the cost of a part from the prototype cars and then estimate how much of a discount they expected when buying that part in bulk, rather than actually negotiating to find a viable price. At one point, the software declared that each Roadster should cost about $68,000, which would leave Tesla making about $30,000 per vehicle. Everyone knew the figure was wrong, but it got reported to the board anyway. Around the middle of 2007, Watkins came to Musk with his findings. Musk was prepared for a high figure but felt confident that the price of the car would come down significantly over time as Tesla ironed out its manufacturing process and increased its sales. "That's when Tim told me it was really bad news," Musk said. "It looked like each Roadster could cost up to $200,000 to make, and Tesla planned to sell the car for only around $85,000. Even in full production, they would have been like $170,000 or something insane," Musk said. Of course, it didn't much matter because about a third of the cars didn't flat out fucking work. Eberhard made attempts to pull his team out of this mess. He'd gone to see a speech in which the famous venture capitalist John Doerr, who became a major investor in green technology companies, declared that he would devote his time and money to trying to save the Earth from global warming because he owed such an effort to his children. Eberhard promptly returned to the Tesla building and ginned up a similar speech. In front of about 100 people, Eberhard had a picture of his young daughter projected onto the wall of the main workshop. He asked the Tesla engineers why he had put that picture up. One of them guessed that it was because people like his daughter would drive the car. To which Eberhard replied, "No. We are building this because by the time she is old enough to drive she will know a car as something completely different to how we know it today, just like you don't think of a phone as a thing on the wall with a cord on it. It's this future that depends on you." Eberhard then thanked some of the key engineers and called out their efforts in public. Many of the engineers had been pulling all-nighters on a regular basis and Eberhard's show boosted morale. "We were all working ourselves to the point of exhaustion," said David Vespremi, a former Tesla spokesman. "Then came this profound moment where we were reminded that building the car was not about getting to an IPO or selling it to a bunch of rich dudes but because it might change what a car is." These victories, though, were not enough to overcome the feeling shared by many of the Tesla engineers that Eberhard had reached the end of his abilities as a CEO. The company veterans had always admired Eberhard's engineering smarts and continued to do so. Eberhard, in fact, had turned Tesla into a cult of engineering. Regrettably, other parts of the company had been neglected, and people doubted Eberhard's ability to take the company from the R&D stage to production. The ridiculous cost of the car, the transmission, the ineffective suppliers were crippling Tesla. And, as the company started to miss its delivery dates, many of the once fanatical consumers who had made their large upfront payments turned on Tesla and Eberhard. "We saw the writing on the wall," Lyons said. "Everyone knew that the person who starts a company is not necessarily the right person to lead it in the long term, but whenever that is the case, it's not easy." Eberhard and Musk had battled for years over some of the design points on the car. But for the most part, they had gotten along well enough. Neither man suffered fools. And they certainly shared many of the same visions for the battery technology and what it could mean to the world. What their relationship could not survive were the cost figures for the Roadster unearthed by Watkins. It looked to Musk as if Eberhard had grossly mismanaged the company by allowing the parts costs to soar so high. Then, as Musk saw it, Eberhard failed to disclose the severity of the situation to the board. While on his way to give a talk to the Motor Press Guild in Los Angeles, Eberhard received a call from Musk and in a brief, Uncomfortable chat learned that he would be replaced as CEO. In August 2007, Tesla's board demoted Eberhard and named him President of Technology, which only exacerbated the company's issues. Martin was so bitter and disruptive, Strobel said. I remember him running around the office and sowing discontent, as we're trying to finish the car and are running out of money and everything is at knife's edge. As Eberhard saw it, other people at Tesla had foisted a wonky finance software application on him that made it tricky to accurately track costs. He contended that the delays and cost increases were partly due to the requests of other members of the management team and that he'd been upfront with the board about the issues. Beyond that, he thought Watkins had made the situation out to be worse than it really was. Start UPS in Silicon Valley view mayhem as standard operating procedure. Valor was used to dealing with older companies, Eberhard said. They found chaos and weren't used to it. This was the chaos of a startup. Eberhard had also already been asking Tesla's board to replace him as CEO and find someone with more manufacturing experience. A few months passed, and Eberhard remained pissed off. Many of the Tesla employees felt like they were caught in the middle of a divorce and had to pick their parent Eberhard or Musk. By the time December arrived, the situation was untenable, and Eberhard left the company altogether. Tesla said in a statement that Eberhard had been offered a position on its advisory board, although he denied that. I am no longer with Tesla Motors, neither on its board of directors nor an employee of any sort, Eberhard said in a statement at the time. I'm not happy with the way I was treated. Musk sent a note to a Silicon Valley newspaper saying, I'm sorry that it came to this and wish it were not so. It was not a question of personality differences, as the decision to have Martin transition to an advisory role was unanimous among the board. Tesla has operational problems that need to be solved, and if the board thought there was any way that Martin could be part of the solution, then he would still be an employee of the company. 9. These statements were the start of a war that would drag on between the two men in public for years and that in many ways continues to the present day. As 2007 played out, the problems mounted for Tesla. The carbon fiber body that looked so good turned out to be a huge pain to paint, and Tesla had to cycle through a couple of companies to find one that could do the work well. Sometimes there were faults in the battery pack. The motor short-circuited now and again. The body panels had visible gaps. The company also had to face up to the reality that a two-speed transmission was not going to happen. In order for the Roadster to achieve its flashy 0 to 60 times with a single-speed transmission, Tesla's engineers had to redesign the car's motor and inverter and shave off some weight. We essentially had to do a complete reboot, Musk said. That was terrible. After Eberhard was removed as CEO, Tesla's board tapped Michael Marks as its interim chief. Marks had run Flextronics, an enormous electronics supplier, and had deep experience with complex manufacturing operations and logistics issues. Marks began interrogating various groups at the company to try to figure out their problems and to prioritize the issues plaguing the Roadster. He also put in some basic rules like making sure that people all showed up at work at the same time to establish a baseline of productivity, a tricky ask in Silicon Valley's work anywhere, anytime culture. All of these moves were part of the Marks list, a 10-point, 100-day plan that included eliminating all faults in the battery packs, getting gaps between body parts to less than 40 millimeters, and booking a specified number of reservations. Martin had been falling apart and lacked a lot of the discipline key for a manager, Strobel said. Michael came in and evaluated the mess and was a bullshit filter. He didn't really have a dog in the fight and could say, I don't care what you think or what you think. This is what we should do. For a while, Marx's strategy worked, and the engineers at Tesla could once again focus on building the Roadster rather than on internal politics. But then Marx's vision for the company began to diverge from Musk's. By this time, Tesla had moved into a larger facility at 1050 Bing Street in San Carlos. The bigger building allowed Tesla to bring the battery work back in-house from Asia and for it to do some of the Roadster manufacturing, alleviating the supply chain issues. Tesla was maturing as a car company, although its wild child startup streak remained well intact. While strolling around the factory one day, Mark saw a smart car from Daimler on a lift. Musk and Strobel had a small side project going on around the smart car to see what it might be like as an electric vehicle. Michael didn't know about it, and he's like, "Who is the CEO here?" said Lyons. The work on the smart car eventually led to Daimler buying a 10% stake in Tesla. Marx's inclination was to try to package Tesla as an asset that could be sold to a larger car company. It was a perfectly reasonable plan. While running Flextronics, Marx had overseen a vast, global supply chain and knew the difficulties of manufacturing intimately. Tesla must have looked borderline hopeless to him at this point. The company could not make its one product well, was poised to hemorrhage money, and had missed a string of delivery deadlines, and yet its engineers were still off doing side experiments. Making Tesla look as pretty as possible for a suitor was the rational thing to do. In just about every other case, Marx would be thanked for his decisive plan of action and saving the company's investors from a big loss. But Musk had little interest in polishing up Tesla's assets for the highest bidder. He'd started the company to put a dent in the automotive industry and force people to rethink electric cars. Instead of doing the fashionable Silicon Valley thing of pivoting toward a new idea or plan, Musk would dig in deeper. The product was late and over budget and everything was wrong, but Elon didn't want anything to do with those plans to either sell the whole company or lose control through a partnership, Strobel said. So, Elon decided to double down. On December 3, 2007, Zeev Drory replaced Marx as CEO. Drory had experience in Silicon Valley, starting a company that made computer memory and selling it to the chip maker Advanced Micro Devices. Drory was not Musk's first pick. A top choice had turned down the job because he didn't want to move from the East Coast and did not inspire much enthusiasm from the Tesla employees. Drory had about 15 years on the youngest Tesla worker and no connection to this group bonded by suffering and toil. He came to be seen more as an executor of Musk's wishes than as a commanding, independent CEO. Musk began making more public gestures to mitigate the bad press around Tesla. He issued statements and did interviews, promising that the Roadster would ship to customers in early 2008. He began talking up a car codenamed White Star. The Roadster had been codenamed Dark Star, that would be a sedan possibly priced around $50,000, and a new factory to build the machine. Given the recent management changes, some reassurances are in order regarding Tesla Motors' future plans, Musk wrote in a blog post. The near-term message is simple and unequivocal: we are going to deliver a great sports car next year that customers will love driving. My car, production Van 1, is already off the production line in the UK and final preparations are being made for importation. Tesla held a series of town hall meetings with customers where it tried to fess up to its problems in the open, and it started building some showrooms for its car. Vince Solito, the former PayPal executive, visited the Menlo Park showroom and found Musk complaining about the public relations issues but clearly inspired by the product Tesla was building. His demeanor changed the moment we got to this display of the motor, Solito said. Dressed in a leather jacket and slacks, Musk started talking about the motor's properties and then put on a performance worthy of a carnival strongman by lifting the 100 or so pound hunk of metal. He picks this thing up and wedges it between his two palms, Solito said. He's holding it, and he's shaking and beads of sweat are forming on his forehead. It wasn't so much a display of strength as a physical demonstration of the beauty of the product. While the customers complained a lot about the delays, they seemed to sense this passion from Musk and share his enthusiasm for the product. Only a handful of customers asked for their prepayments back. Tesla employees soon got to witness the same Musk that SpaceX employees had seen for years. When an issue like the Roadster's faulty carbon fiber body panels cropped up, Musk dealt with it directly. He flew to England in his jet to pick up some new manufacturing tools for the body panels and personally delivered them to a factory in France to ensure that the Roadster stayed on its production schedule. The days of people being ambiguous about the Roadster's manufacturing costs were gone as well. Elon got fired up and said we were going to do this intense cost down program, said Popple. He gave a speech, saying we would work on Saturdays and Sundays and sleep under desks until it got done. Someone pushed back from the table and argued that everyone had been working so hard just to get the car done, and they were ready for a break and to see their families. Elon said, "I would tell those people they will get to see their families a lot when we go bankrupt." I was like, wow, but I got it. I had come out of a military culture, and you just have to make your objective happen. Employees were required to meet at 7 a.m. every Thursday morning for bill of materials updates. They had to know the price of every part and have a cogent plan for getting parts cheaper. If the motor costs $6,500 a pop at the end of December, Musk wanted it to cost $3,800 by April. The costs were plotted and analyzed each month. If you started falling behind, there was hell to pay, Popple said. Everyone could see it, and people lost their jobs when they didn't deliver. Elon has a mind that's a bit like a calculator. If you put a number on the projector that does not make sense, he will spot it. He doesn't miss details. Popple found Musk's style aggressive, but he liked that Musk would listen to a well-argued, analytical point and often change his mind if given a good enough reason. Some people thought Elon was too tough or hot-tempered or tyrannical, Popple said. But these were hard times, and those of us close to the operational realities of the company knew it. I appreciated that he didn't sugarcoat things. On the marketing front, Musk would run daily Google searches for news stories about Tesla. If he saw a bad story, he ordered someone to fix it even though the Tesla public relations people could do little to sway the reporters. One employee missed an event to witness the birth of his child. Musk fired off an email saying, "That is no excuse. I am extremely disappointed. You need to figure out where your priorities are. We're changing the world and changing history, and you either commit or you don't." Marketing people who made grammatical mistakes in emails were let go, as were other people who hadn't done anything awesome in recent memory. He can be incredibly intimidating at times but doesn't have a real sense for just how imposing he can be, said one former Tesla executive. We'd have these meetings and take bets on who was going to get bloodied and bruised. If you told him that you made a particular choice because it was the standard way things had always been done, he'd kick you out of a meeting fast. He'd say, "I never want to hear that phrase again. What we have to do is fucking hard and half-assing things won't be tolerated." He just destroys you and, if you survive, he determines if he can trust you. He has to understand that you're as crazy as he is. This ethos filtered through the entire company, and everyone quickly understood that Musk meant business. Strobel, while sometimes on the bad end of the critiques, welcomed Musk's heart-charging presence. The 5 years to get to this point had been an enjoyable slog for him. Strobel had transformed from a quiet, capable engineer who shuffled around Tesla's factory floor with his head down into the most crucial member of the technical team. He knew more about the batteries and the electric drivetrain than just about anyone else at the company. He also began developing a role as a go-between for employees and Musk. Strobel's engineering smarts and work ethic had earned Musk's respect, and Strobel found that he could deliver difficult messages to Musk on behalf of other employees. As he would do for years to come, Strobel also proved willing to check his ego at the door. All that mattered was getting the Roadster and the follow-on sedan to market to popularize electric cars, and Musk looked like the best person to make that happen. Other employees had enjoyed the thrill of the engineering challenge over the past 5 years but were burnt out beyond repair. Wright didn't believe that an electric car for the masses would ever take off. He left and started his own company dedicated to making electric versions of delivery trucks. Berdichevsky had been a crucial, do-anything young engineer for much of Tesla's existence. Now that the company employed about 300 people, he felt less effective and didn't relish the idea of suffering for another 5 years to bring the sedan to market. He would leave Tesla, get a couple of degrees from Stanford, and co-found a startup looking to make a revolutionary new battery that could soon go into electric cars. With Eberhard gone, Tarp Enning found Tesla less fun. He didn't see eye to eye with Drury and also shied away from the idea of frying his soul to get the sedan out. Lyons stuck around longer, which is a minor miracle. At various points, he had led the development of most of the core technology behind the Roadster, including the battery packs, the motor, the power electronics, and, yes, the transmission. This meant that for about 5 years Lyons had been among Tesla's most capable employees and the guy constantly in the doghouse for being behind on something and thus holding the rest of the company up. He suffered through some of Musk's more colorful tirades directed either at him or suppliers that had let Tesla down, that included talk of people's balls being chopped off and other violent or sexual acts. Lyons also saw an exhausted, stressed out Musk spit coffee across a conference room table because it was cold and then, without a pause, demand that the employees work harder, do more, and mess up less. Like so many people privy to these performances, Lyons came away with no illusions about Musk's personality but with the utmost respect for his vision and drive to execute. Working at Tesla back then was like being Kurtz in Apocalypse Now, Lyons said. Don't worry about the methods or if they're unsound. Just get the job done. It comes from Elon. He listens, asks good questions, is fast on his feet, and gets to the bottom of things. Tesla could survive the loss of some of these early hires. Its strong brand had allowed the company to keep recruiting top talent, including people from large automotive companies who knew how to get over the last set of challenges blocking the Roadster from reaching customers. But Tesla's major issue no longer revolved around effort, engineering, or clever marketing. Heading into 2008, the company was running out of money. The Roadster had cost about $140 million to develop, way over the $25 million originally estimated in the 2004 business plan. Under normal circumstances, Tesla had probably done enough to raise more funds. These, however, were not normal times. The big automakers in the United States were charging toward bankruptcy in the middle of the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. In the midst of all this, Musk needed to convince Tesla's investors to fork over tens of millions of additional dollars, and those investors had to go to their constituents to lay out why this made any sense. As Musk put it, try to imagine explaining that you're investing in an electric car company, and everything you read about the car company sounds like it is shit and doomed and it's a recession and no one is buying cars. All Musk had to do to dig Tesla out of this conundrum was lose his entire fortune and verge on a nervous breakdown.